Chapter 20 of the Return of Dr. Fu-Manchu. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Elaine Tweddle. The Return of Dr. Fu-Manchu by Sax Rohmer. Chapter 20 The Crossbar. How long I lay there alone I had no means of computing. My mind was busy with many matters, but principally concerned with my fate in the immediate future. That Dr. Fu-Manchu entertained for me a singular kind of regard, I had had evidence before. He had formed the erroneous opinion that I was an advanced scientist who could be of use to him in his experiments, and I was aware that he cherished a project of transporting me to some place in China where his principal laboratory was situated. Respecting the means which he proposed to employ, I was unlikely to forget that this man, who had penetrated further along certain byways of science than seemed humanly possible, undoubtedly was master of a process for producing artificial catalepsy. It was my lot, then, to be packed in a chest, to all intents and purposes a dead man for the time being, and dispatched to the interior of China. What a fool I had been! To think that I had learned nothing from my long and dreadful experience of the methods of Dr. Fu-Manchu; to think that I had come alone in quest of him; that, leaving no trace behind me, I had deliberately penetrated to his secret abode. I have said that my wrists were manacled behind me, that manacles being attached to a chain fastened in the wall. I now contrived with extreme difficulty to reverse the position of my hands; that is to say, I climbed backward through the loop formed by my fettered arms, so that instead of their being locked behind me, they were now locked in front. Then I began to examine the fetters, learning, as I had anticipated, that they fastened with a lock. I sat gazing at the steel bracelets in the light of the lamp which swung over my head, and it became apparent to me that I had gained little by my contortion. A slight noise disturbed these unpleasant reveries. It was nothing less than the rattling of keys. For a moment I wondered if I had heard aright, or if the sound portended the coming of some servant of the doctor, who was locking up the establishment for the night. The jangling sound was repeated, and in such a way that I could not suppose it to be accidental. Someone was deliberately rattling a small bunch of keys in an adjoining room. And now my heart leaped wildly, then seemed to stand still. With a low whistling cry, a little gray shape shot through the doorway by which Fu Manchu had retired, and rolled, like a ball of fluff blown by the wind, completely under the table which bore the weird scientific appliances of the Chinaman. The advent of the gray object was accompanied by a further rattling of keys. My fear left me, and a mighty anxiety took its place. This creature, which now crouched chattering at me from beneath the big table, was Fu Manchu's marmoset, and in the intervals of its chattering and grimacing it nibbled, speculatively, at the keys upon a ring which it clutched in its tiny hands. Key after key it sampled in this manner, evincing a growing dissatisfaction with the uncrackable nature of its find. One of those keys might be that of the handcuffs! I could not believe that the tortures of Tantalus were greater than were mine at this moment. In all my hopes of rescue or release, I had included nothing so strange, so improbable as this. A sort of awe possessed me, for if by this means the key which should release me should come into my possession, how, ever again, could I doubt a beneficent Providence? But they were not yet in my possession; moreover, the key of the handcuffs might not be amongst the bunch. Were there no means whereby I could induce the marmoset to approach me? Whilst I racked my brains for some scheme, the little animal took the matter out of my hands. Tossing the ring with its jangling contents a yard or so across the carpet in my direction, it leaped in pursuit, picked up the ring, whirled it over its head, and then threw a complete somersault around it. Now it snatched up the keys again, and holding them close to its ear, rattled them furiously. Finally, with an incredible spring, it leaped on to the chain supporting the lamp above my head, and with the garish shades swinging and spinning wildly, clung there looking down at me like an acrobat on a trapeze. The tiny bluish face, completely framed in grotesque whiskers, enhanced the illusion of an acrobatic comedian. Never for a moment did it release its hold upon the key ring. My suspense now was intolerable. I feared to move, lest, alarming the marmoset, it should run off, taking the keys with it. So as I lay there, looking up at the little creature swinging above me, the second wonder of the night came to pass. A voice that I could never forget, strive how I would, a voice that haunted my dreams by night, and for which by day I was ever listening, cried out from some adjoining room. "Ta'ala hina!" it called. "Ta'ala hina peko!" It was Karamaneh. The effect upon the marmoset was instantaneous. Down came the bunch of keys upon one side of the shade, almost falling on my head, and down leaped the ape upon the other. In 2 leaps it had traversed the room and had vanished through the curtained doorway. If ever I had need of coolness, it was now. The slightest mistake would be fatal. The keys had slipped from the mattress of the divan, and now lay just beyond the reach of my fingers. Rapidly I changed my position, and sought, without undue noise, to move the keys with my foot. I had actually succeeded in sliding them back onto the mattress, when, unheralded by any audible footstep, Karamaneh came through the doorway, holding the marmoset in her arms. She wore a dress of fragile muslin material, and out from its folds protruded one silk-stockinged foot, resting in a high-heeled red shoe. For a moment she stood watching me with a sort of enforced composure, then her glance strayed to the keys lying upon the floor. Slowly, and with her eyes fixed again upon my face, she crossed the room, stooped and took up the key ring. It was one of the poignant moments of my life, for by that simple act all my hopes had been shattered. Any poor lingering doubt that I may have had left me now. Had the slightest spark of friendship animated the bosom of Karamaneh, most certainly she would have overlooked the presence of the keys which represented my one hope of escape from the clutches of the fiendish Chinaman. There is a silence more eloquent than words. For half a minute or more Karamaneh stood watching me, forcing herself to watch me, and I looked up at her with a concentrated gaze in which rage and reproach must have been strangely mingled. What eyes she had, of that blackly lustrous sort nearly always associated with unusually dark complexions, but Karamaneh's complexion was peach-like, or rather of an exquisite and delicate fairness which reminded me of the petal of a rose. By some I had been accused of raving about this girl's beauty, but only by those who had not met her, for indeed she was astonishingly lovely. At last her eyes fell, the long lashes drooped upon her cheeks. She turned and walked slowly to the chair in which Fu-Manchu had sat. Placing the keys upon the table amid the scientific litter, she rested one dimpled elbow upon the yellow page of the book, and with her chin in her palm again directed upon me that enigmatical gaze. I dared not think of the past in which this beautiful, treacherous girl had played a part, yet watching her I could not believe even now that she was false. My state was truly a pitiable one. I could have cried out in sheer anguish. With her long lashes partly lowered she watched me a while, then spoke, and her voice was music which seemed to mock me. Every inflection of that elusive accent reopened, lancet-like, the ancient wound. "Why do you look at me so?" she said, almost in a whisper. "By what right do you reproach me? Have you ever offered me friendship, that I should repay you with friendship? When first you came to the house where I was by the river, came to save someone from—" There was the familiar hesitation which always preceded the name of Fu Manchu. "From him. You treated me as your enemy, although I would have been your friend." There was appeal in the soft voice, but I laughed mockingly and threw myself back upon the divan. Karamaneh stretched out her hands toward me, and I shall never forget the expression which flashed into those glorious eyes, but seeing me intolerant of her appeal, she drew back and quickly turned her head aside. Even in this hour of extremity, of impotent wrath, I could find no contempt in my heart for her feeble hypocrisy. With all the old wonder I watched that exquisite profile, and Karamaneh's very deceitfulness was a salve, for had she not cared she would not have attempted it. Suddenly she stood up, taking the keys in her hands, and approached me. "Not by word nor by look," she said quietly, "have you asked me for my friendship, but because I cannot bear you to think of me as you do.